Hello everybody, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from our hometown scrapbook. Aerial Circus. Hello there. It was not an important event to most people, but it was a little startling to look up in the skies over Grays Harbor and see a pair of identical airplanes standing on their props and then roaring, banking, slipping on wild gyrations. It didn't make any headlines in Portland, and no one in Seattle got excited about it. But a lot of Grays Harbor folks got stiff necks looking at the sky circus that was going on. And when they heard the story of it all, well, they got a chuckle from it. And a boy and a girl who were just about to walk down the aisle to the altar took it as a personal salute and never forgot it, although it was a long time ago as folks measure lifetimes. So when George is taking his customary few seconds for our sponsor, we'll unravel the yarn of a wedding that took place in Aberdeen nearly a generation ago and salute the bride and groom that had the town talking, for nothing like it had ever been seen in Grays Harbor before, nor do I believe since. We found a page in our scrapbook last night that told you of the hectic days of 1929, when the world's financial course was being changed, and the lives of Grays Harbor residents were about to be altered in a manner that none could predict. And the story that we find tonight in the scrapbook came right out of that era. For with that world of finance tumbling about them, the whole way of life that we had come to know in the years of the gay 20s about to be changed and forgotten, the old story of boy meets girl was written and rewritten countless of times, and the young people of Grays Harbor sailed into the stormy sea of the Depression years, full tilt and afraid of nothing. Young Mary Dudley, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. L.P. Dudley, had met Vern Latimer of Seattle while two young people were attending the university. The usual things happen that happen to young people, and in the summer of 1929, the Dudleys of Aberdeen announced the engagement of their daughter to Latimer, and the marriage planned for the fall. October 23rd was set for the date for the wedding, and the Episcopal Church in Aberdeen was to be the scene of the affair, for such was the formalities. The list of gifts were drawn up, and when the groom submitted his list, it contained the names of Grant Calhoun and Johnny Bloom. In fact, they came first after the usual array of relatives. And there was a reason. Grant Calhoun and Johnny Bloom had been the little dirty-faced kids that little Vern Latimer had played with behind the barn when they were kids in Seattle together. They had been at the high school friends with whom he had played football. They were the friends he had chummed with in the college years. They had lived together in college, spent their summers together, and as members of the Naval Air Reserve, they had flown together in the little training ships from the Sandpoint Naval Air Station in the days when the Navy was trying to interest young Americans in getting a set of its silver wings. There was no gold stars after their names on the wedding list, but Vern made sure that the names were there. Well, the preparations for the wedding went about the way most preparations do for such things. People dropping into the old Broadway pharmacy on the corner of Heron and Broadway, where the J.C. Penney store now stands, had a commitment for L.P. Dudley, the father of the bride. It was the usual observation that they had heard there was to be a wedding in the family, and L.P. would look over his glasses and smile a wiry smile and note crisply that they were correct. Then he would wrap his purchase professionally in spotless white paper, ring the cash register, and disappear into a maze of shelves and the welter of cartoon and bottles that composed the pharmaceutical department in the old store, and which reminded a lot of people of the catacombs. Yes, plans were going ahead well before the wedding. On October 23rd, that was a Wednesday. It was not important that the stock market was going crazy and would set all-time records for sales the next day, and no one paid much attention to the grand jury that was probing vice conditions of Grace Harbor. That is, no one interested in the wedding about to take place in Aberdeen. And from Monday on, the guests began to arrive. There were relatives and friends, and the Dudley residence there was the usual hustle and bustle that attends such an event. The groom arrived in town and managed to remain as much in the way of things as possible, and the bride's mother was sure that nothing would be finished by the time the wedding march began. But somehow, the bride's gown was finished, and the bridesmaids' gowns were ready, and everyone who was to participate was in good health, and the big day for the wedding arrived. It was the morning of Wednesday, October 23rd, 1929. The morning that two young people had certain would never come, but that like all such mornings since the beginning of the world did come. And the bride's mother noted that it would be a grand day for a wedding. The October sun was bright, the air sharp and clear, and the feverish bustle of the last day's preparations began. It was just another day to most of the people of Grace Harbor. Oh, it was a day of activity for the town speculators as they watched the stock market gyrate on the blackboards of the old bucket shop in the Finch building. And it was a busy day for John Mashin, who was trying to whip together a football team that would hold its own against Hoquiam. John didn't know it, but a terrible disaster was brewing. But generally speaking, it was just a bright autumn day, the kind that makes Grace Harborites feel glad to be alive. And then, late in the morning, just after 11 o'clock, the roar of an airplane broke on, and the background of the whining saw and the noises of the town going about its business. The roar of two airplanes, and the residents of the harbor looked up. For in 1929, an airplane was still somewhat a curiosity, and two planes, at least two planes, identical airplanes, well, that was something that just didn't happen. The planes flew over town, wingtip to wingtip, and proceeded over the rooftops in an alarmingly low level to spot just above the bride's parents' home. Then they peeled off and zoomed lower still, just skimming the trees, and waved to the groom, who didn't seem at all surprised, who waved back to them from his front lawn. Then began the aerial circus that all Grace Harbor watched. The planes climbed together at a steep angle, as steep as the little Navy training planes of that vintage time would climb, then banked and dove on the outside of the sky, then barrel rolled and looped, side slipped and stood on their tails. The sky rose and winged over and skimmed so low that folks thought the pilots would reach out and grab the bricks off some chimneys. When the show was well underway, the two planes were taking up the whole sky over Aberdeen. Almost everyone on the street was gawking skyward, and the windows in the new Becker building and the old Finch building were filled with spectators craning their necks at the sky stunters. In the yards of the Anderson Middleton, at the foot of Broadway, carrier drivers stopped halfway astride a load of lumber to point to the sky, and the men on the green chain let the fresh cut boards pile up while they ran out from under the shed to catch a glimpse of the crazy fools who were trying to kill themselves in the clouds. A bus driver stopped his bus on Wishkah to see what everyone on the sidewalk was gawking at. He could see all right, for just about that time one of the planes zoomed low over the new Elks building and jarred the windows before it started a steep climb and wide open bank and dove at the bride's house. For almost an hour the circus kept up, until almost everyone in town was sure a pair of maniacs were loose in the sky above the city, and the people on all sides in Cosmopolis and in East Hoquiam were rummaging through trunks for binoculars and opera glasses to get a better view of the two planes that had gone berserk. But shortly after noon it let up, and the two little trainers glided in to make a landing at the airfield at the Aberdeen port dock, where the groom met them. And of course, there they were, Grant Calhoun and Johnny Bloom. And it was their friendly way of riding finesse to bachelorhood for a partner of a long-standing tradition. Oh yes, the wedding Well, everything went as well as scheduled. The bride had never looked so lovely, folks said, and the groom had never looked so handsome. And to the bride and the groom and the fond relatives, it was the most important event for a long time. But for the residents of Grays Harbor, who heard the story of the two young pilots and their aerial circus, there was many a chuckle, and the event that they remembered was the sky antics of the two guests to the wedding and the show that they had staged on October 23rd to benefit the two young people about to marry, but also for the benefit of the appreciative audience that took in just about everyone on Grays Harbor. Aerial stunting seems to be out of fashion at midpoint in this 20th century, but time was when you could turn out a crowd in any park in the country to watch a stunting pilot do wing-overs and do loop-de-loops and to terminate the stunts back in a long period of ago. And in the mid-1920s, when the harbor was getting used to the roar of motors in the sky, there were some daring performers who walked wings and stood their little biplanes on end. But none of them matched the show that the couple of young lads staged for the harbor the day they wrote the greeting in the sky to a lifelong friend turned Benedict. And as one of their manifestations in the life in the 1920s, before Depression years changed the harbor's outlook on life, we record tonight as a fond memory in our hometown scrapbook. Thanks for listening.